I think I'm ready to panic about the Heat. In years past, I would have likely been advocating for patience even after a 1-3 start, but this year is a little bit different for a couple of reasons. A, as I mentioned in the team previews, the league is as talented and as deep as it's ever been. There just aren't very many easy games anymore. Even the tanking teams out east are pretty solid. You've got Indiana with still some solid vets like Miles Turner and Buddy Hield, and then future young stars in Halliburton and Mathurin. A lot of people this offseason picked Detroit to threaten for a play-in this year on the back of the backcourt of Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham. And then Orlando was low-key one of the better defensive teams down the stretch of last season, and they added the number one pick in Paolo Banchero, who has been as good, if not better, than advertised. And then if you look at the play-in teams from out east last year, the Cavs, the Nets, the Hornets, and the Hawks, of that group, really only the Hornets are going to take a step back this season. With all of their drama, I just can't see them competing for even a play-in spot this year. But as far as the rest of those teams that I just mentioned go, the Nets are essentially adding Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons with a bunch of quality role players to last year's team. If they're able to get their heads on straight, they're absolutely one of the most talented teams in the league. The Cavs were threatening for home court in the first round last year before they were just crippled by injuries down the stretch. And oh, yeah, they added an all NBA caliber guard in Donovan Mitchell. The Hawks also made a huge splash this offseason. They add an all star level guard in DeJounte Murray. And that gets me to the title of this video. There are going to be some really good teams out east that are only going to make the play in. And so far, the Heat look like a prime candidate for that. And then B, this team just doesn't pass the eye test. It hasn't been a case of a couple bad nights of shooting or a case of us just looking sloppy on the back of trying to integrate a bunch of new pieces or just bad or lazy effort to start the season. I don't think that we've shot the ball particularly well. Sure, I could agree with that, but it hasn't been a total disaster. Statistically, we're really not that far off from how well we shot the ball last year. And I think the effort has been there for the most part defensively. I don't see there being able to be like a circle the wagons, come to Jesus type moment where we're able to hit this all new level of effort. Just as presently constructed, this group just doesn't have the juice, in my opinion, to make a lot of noise come postseason time. And at least so far, I think it's fairly unlikely that we're going to finish with a top six seed out east. So, what's the problem here? What happened from last year's version of the team to this year's version, and what can we really do to fix it? Well, I think in general, as Heat fans, and I'm guilty of this as well, we might have overreacted a little bit to what we saw last season, specifically with us finishing as the number one seed in the East. The prior two seasons, we finished with a fifth and a sixth seed in a much less talented Eastern Conference than the one that we're currently facing today. And if you think back to last season, around halfway through the year, that's when that Omicron variant really started running wild. And guys like Joe Johnson and Lance Stevenson were brought back just to give teams enough warm bodies to actually play a game of basketball. Everyone was just scraping together whatever and whoever they could find. And the Miami Heat as an organization have proved that they're better at than anyone else in the league at finding those undrafted and overlooked guys and kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for quality players. And Spoelstra as a coach is better than anyone else in the league at getting the most out of those players. So last season was just an environment that we as the Miami Heat were better equipped to succeed in than any other team in the league. The reality is we're likely far closer to that fifth and sixth seed range talent wise than we are a team that's going to be fighting for home court advantage throughout the playoffs. And for further proof of that, think back to last year's playoff run. We matched up with the Hawks, the 76ers, and the Celtics. Can anyone confidently say that we were even equal in terms of raw talent to any of those teams? In every single series, I think that we faced a pretty drastic talent disadvantage. We just out executed, out toughed, and out willed our way to a near finals berth. We had a clear identity of toughness and defensive versatility, and that's what gets me to this current version, this current year's team. We're sort of a team without an identity right now, and it seems crazy to me to think that our identity was tied so heavily to PJ Tucker, but when you start to think about it, it sort of was. we really didn't do anything to even attempt to replace him. PJ Tucker was our enforcer. He's one of the physically strongest players in the league. He could switch 1 through 5. He's got an incredibly high basketball IQ, and he always plays within himself and within his skill set and what he can do. We basically just tried to slide Caleb Martin into the starting 5 in that slot and call it a day. But so far, he's looked totally overwhelmed as the starter. And I'm not that mad at him for this. I doubt we could have expected much more from a guy who wasn't even a full time NBA player to start last season. And then, as recent as the playoffs, wasn't even a guy that was consistently in the rotation. That's a huge ask. And as a result, he's just trying to do too much out there. It almost looks like he feels like deep down he doesn't deserve that starting role. He's taken some really questionable shots, like pull ups from mid range, which is far outside the scope of what we've seen him do and what we would like him to do. He isn't shooting the ball well from deep, and defenses are just completely ignoring him out there, letting him have as many open threes as he would like. And on the defensive side of the ball, that's the area that he is supposedly hanging his hat on. He's just been getting cooked out there. And to be fair, DeMar DeRozan cooked everyone in a Heat jersey on opening night. And Tatum and Brown are one of, if not the best wing tandem in the league. So how much can we really expect from him? But if he's going to be the starter and he's the solution for losing PJ Tucker, he has to be more than solid defensively. He has to be like a Tony Allen level defender, especially if he's only going to shoot like low 30s from 3 point range. And I just don't think he can consistently do that, provide that elite level defense or really good floor spacing consistently for 30 to 35 minutes a night as the starter. So it just doesn't seem to be a fair ask to me, but I don't know what the alternative is. I guess rookie Nikola Jovic, I would certainly like to see what he can do, but I'm not at practice every day like this coaching staff is. So maybe he just really isn't ready. But I think it's at least worth kicking the tires on. And then outside of that, what are we really looking at? Duncan Robinson, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent. None of them are going to be better as a starting 4 than Caleb Martin, or even as a starting 3 with us sliding Jimmy Butler down to the 4. I would maybe like to see Max Strus just because of the shooting factor. If we're not getting elite level defense from Caleb, I would at least like to see Max Strus's shooting out there. But if we did decide to go that route, what is the bench going to do scoring wise? It's already looking pretty bleak bench production wise. So hopefully Oladipo can shore that up, but he remains banged up. So I don't know what we're going to really get from him. So there just doesn't seem to be a good option currently. Bam is another guy who hasn't played well to start the season. But to his credit, the fan base and the organization have called for him to be more aggressive when looking for his scoring chances. And he has tried to implement that, but it still feels like he doesn't fully understand what that means. He's fallen into the Anthony Davis trap, just the settle for tough jump shots trap. It just feels like he takes a lot of tough dribble pull ups or turnarounds when he really doesn't have to. In the Raptors game on Monday, I can think of a few situations where he got Pascal Siakam on a switch or just had him as the matchup, and he went to that turnaround jump shot. Siakam is nowhere near as strong as Bam, but he is as quick. So settling for a turnaround off the dribble plays right into the hands of a guy like Siakam. Whereas if Bam just put his head down and tried to push Siakam under the basket, as an individual defender, I don't think Pascal has an answer for that. Those turnaround jump shots off the dribble Bam takes should be reserved for situations where the shot clock is winding down, and it should really never be used when there's 10 seconds or more on the shot clock, or especially if you're going to have a guard switched on you. He should be looking to get to the cup every single time he gets the ball, either with his speed when he has a slower, bigger defender on him, or with his power when he has a smaller, quicker guy on him. Pull-up jump shots and just jump shots in general should only be used when the defense sags way off. And those turnarounds, as I mentioned, only when the shot clock is winding down. But I don't know if he's ever going to figure that out. He just isn't the type of guy that's wired with a scoring mentality. So there is still hope that he can figure it out, but at some point he just is who he is as a player. And rebounding wise, I know we would like to see Bam getting at least 10 boards a game, and we certainly wouldn't want to see Tyler Hero leading the team in rebounding. But I think this has more to do with the prior issue I mentioned with Caleb Martin being just completely overwhelmed as a starter as opposed to anything that Bam is doing. And what do I mean by that? Well, teams know that if they pull Bam out of the paint using a pick and roll or just getting a switch, that leaves really only Jimmy Butler and Tyler Hero as rebounding options for the Heat. So that's exactly what's been happening. Opposing teams are pulling Bam away from the basket, which means he's just going to get less rebounds because he's stuck out on the perimeter. And then also because Caleb Martin hasn't proved to be anywhere near the defender that PJ Tucker was as a starter. That means more driving lanes and more situations where Bam has to come over and help, pulling him away from rebounding opportunities. That's also why we've seen Bam in some foul trouble here to start the season. The Raptors, again, in the game Monday, took full advantage of this. They just crashed the boards with their bigger and stronger athletes. And that's also what killed our offensive efficiency because we had to send everyone to the boards in this like attempt to gang rebound. We couldn't get out on the break. And thus we were always going up against a set Raptors defense, which is just due to their athletes and their length is going to be a huge pain in the ass for any team in the league. And those tempo issues segue me into my next and likely biggest issue I have amongst the current Heat players, and that's Kyle Lowry. And listen, I defended this dude to the death last season. The team played much better with him on the court last year, but that doesn't seem to still be the case this year. And at some point, production matters. It just has to matter at some point. And for all the talk of him putting an emphasis on getting back into shape and the team putting an emphasis on that, Lowry really doesn't look any different to me, eye test wise, this season. He isn't shooting the ball well. He's missing a lot of his jump shots short, which tells me he doesn't have his legs underneath him. He's not beating anyone off the dribble hardly. And then in the Raptors game on Monday, down the stretch, they were attacking him with Siakam versus Tyler Hero. So that's how strongly that the Raptors felt about his defense. We just need a hell of a lot more from a guy who's making nearly $30 million a year, especially after watching Precious Achua just tear us apart, a guy who we gave up to get Kyle Lowry. So as a result, Lowry has just become expendable in my mind, and especially with the emergence of Tyler Hero. Hero entering Monday's game was in the 96th percentile for pick and roll efficiency as the ball handler. I know it's a small sample size, sure, but that puts him in line with guys like Luka Doncic and Jaylen Brown. And then also, just eye test wise, when he got switched on to Siakam, he held up pretty well. He got a handful of stops, forced Siakam into some tough shots. You can really tell just visually that he put in the work this offseason to improve defensively. But back to Lowry, since he and Duncan are really the only expendable players who are on tradable contracts, we have to at least look both of their ways to try and get some big physical wing players. I don't know who that's going to be at this stage, especially this early in the season, but even if we were to come off of Kyle Lowry, I think we're going to be fine guard wise. Presumably, we're getting Oladipo back at some point, and if he's looking anywhere near the version that we saw in the playoffs, and it improved at that because as the playoffs went on, he just looked better and better. So hopefully that will continue to be the case, and he'll get closer to that Indiana version, even if he never hits it. I think you can do a lot worse from a backcourt rotation perspective than Tyler Hero, Victor Oladipo, and Gabe Vincent. Strus can also play the two. He's a pretty solid ball handler. And then obviously you have Jimmy who can also handle the ball and play make at a pretty elite level. And I just think that Kyle Lowry has to be the move here. He has to be the guy that gets moved on because with a potential Duncan Robinson trade, if we were just to move him and try and bring back one wing player, we're looking at a guy like Kyle Kuzma, maybe if the Wizards decide to punt pretty early into this season, or Jay Crowder from the Suns, but that just isn't enough in my opinion. I really like Kuzma. I still like Jay Crowder, but again, we're just sort of running it back with last year's team with an older Kyle Lowry and older Jimmy Butler, and then either Jay Crowder or Kyle Kuzma in place of PJ Tucker. That's just not enough to get it done. And I really think we need to be moving on something quickly here. The East is just going to be too good this season. Every game is going to count more than ever if we're looking to avoid the play-in tournament. Also, how many more years are we going to have left of prime Jimmy Butler? This year, maybe next. I talked about it during the top 50 players in the league video. This is likely going to be the last season where we see him as a top 10 player in the league. So given that the window is almost shut on the Jimmy Butler led era, this just isn't a year that we could afford to just sit back and be patient.